Oh, Sarah, I think that our landscape architect, Bruce, is trying to join, but it doesn't seem like, maybe could you let him into the webinar, please?
Just a minute. Okay, we are live streaming on YouTube and we are recording. And Patrick, if you are ready, and take it away.
I am ready. Welcome to the July 29th, 2020 Design Review Special Meeting. And I'm going to start off with a roll call. I am Patrick Collins. Eugene?
Yes, here. Eugene here.
Glenn?
Glenn Cass here.
And John?
John is here.
Awesome. All righty. First item is the adoption of the agenda. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All right. All those in favor? I think
Aye.
I think we can go. We assume everyone's on board. Okay. The next section is public comments. This is the section for public comments for items that are not on the agenda this evening. And Sarah, do we have anyone that would like to make public comments for non-agenda items?
So I'll just make the announcement that if you'd like to make a public comment, you should use the raise your hand function on the webinar. And if you are calling in, you should use *9. If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand or call in now. I see no public comments.
All right, moving on. We have no consent calendar, no study sessions, no signs, and on to continued public hearings, DR 2219, TP 4919, 3483 Golden Gate Way. And it appears that Sarah is our planner.
Oops. Good evening, commissioners. The item before you this evening is a second review of the residential building known as Madison Park at 3483 Golden Gateway. No new public notice was provided for this meeting because it was a continued matter, but we did receive some additional public comment and that has been forwarded to each of the commissioners as well as the applicant and also posted on the city's website. As a refresher, it's located in the southeast corner of Golden Gate Way and First Street across from the library. We have a single family residential to the south, along with a channelized creek. To the east, we have the city-owned parking lot. As I mentioned, to the north, the Lafayette Library and Learning Center, and then to the east, there's a commercial structure, currently the nut factory. The existing use is 47 apartments, some of which have been converted to personal services, but the proposed use is to demolish that building and construct a two new buildings, including 71 apartments for rent, 9 of which are affordable, 6 of them are very low, and 3 are low in terms of the affordability rate. The height has been modified from 56 feet to 53 feet 6 inches, and the parking spaces have been adjusted as well, which I'll go into in a little bit. Just a little bit of background on the state density bonus law that this application is falling under for the public and the commission. So the city of Lafayette requires 15% affordability for our inclusionary housing regulations. And then in addition to that, there's the state density bonus, which allows some additional units to be created in order to encourage affordable housing development. So in addition, there are concessions and waivers that are allowed to be applied for as a result of the affordability levels. And so the concessions are related, essentially variances or waivers from the zoning requirements. And those concessions are related specifically to the cost, and they're limited based on the amount of affordability. And waivers are the exceptions or variances from the development standards, and those are unlimited allowances. The state is very deferential towards housing given our current housing crisis. So the commission's charge is to make sure that the building and site design provide a desirable environment for the future residents, as well as ensuring that the development is what's being proposed, including the height, number of units, type of units, all of that fits within the best as best as possible within the city's design criteria. So the Design Review Commission reviewed this at its May 13th meeting and provided feedback to the applicants. The commission generally felt that the building was quite large and massive, but was generally favorable towards the design, as well as the articulation and materials provided. Specific comments related to parking, massing along the southern elevation, the creek easement, height of the element on the eastern portion of the property, detailing of the interior of courtyards, as well as the fencing along the creek, and then some additional information requested about lighting details and the container retail. And then in terms of colors and materials, the commission wanted to understand the choices more clearly. So I think the applicant has done a pretty good job of outlining those adjustments that they've made in response to the commission's comments. As I mentioned previously, most notably was the parking was modified to allow more independently accessible spaces, and then the overall height was reduced, as well as the massing along the southern elevation was adjusted. As noted in the staff report, the creek easement is indicated as a condition of approval. I think there is some clarification about the language that needs to be made. I believe that it is meant to be coincident with the flood control easement, but sort of big picture, I think that the Creeks Committee and the applicant are on the same page about allowing an easement to be coincident with the flood control district easement. In terms of process, the Design Review Commission is reviewing context, bulk, mass, privacy, articulation, colors, and materials, all of those elements. Then the matter will go to the Planning Commission. All new buildings in the downtown go to the Planning Commission for review. And then the City Council will review the concessions and waivers specific to the height. So with that, staff is recommending the Design Review Commission review the revised project by the applicant with any comments or recommendations, and forward a recommendation of approval with conditions to the Planning Commission. I'm available for questions if you have any.
Eugene, do you have any questions? Glenn, any questions?
No. None for staff.
John? John, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Somebody's echoing. I had been muted. Anyway, I'll see what I can do. I did have a couple of questions, I think for staff first, and maybe for the applicant. Regarding the required creek easement, Sarah, you mentioned that there may be some reconciliation of language. There were places where I saw a setback of 14 feet required, and places where I saw a setback of 10 required. My question is, do we agree that 14 is the right number, and does the project accommodate that?
I think the ideal was a 10-foot easement overall for the creek side of the trail side of things. And I think that maybe the 14 was showing what the actual distance was, but ultimately the applicant, I think, is going to address that.
Okay, I think it was the flood district document that stated 14 feet. And then my other question is, the city engaged a landscape consultant for some additional review, and I wanted to and that was attached with the information that was shared with everybody. That was just after our last meeting, I believe, and I wanted to understand whether that input had been shared with the design team, and if the design team was given this in time to respond to it.
Certainly. So all of the referrals, any public comment or referrals that are provided to me, I certainly forward to the applicant straight away, and I will allow them they can address.
Okay, yeah, when we get to questions for the applicant, that will be mine. Thank you.
All righty, no other questions? Do we have an applicant?
Yep,
Welcome.
thank you. Sarah, can I share my screen?
You should be able to now.
Okay, great. Can you guys see that okay? Now okay?
Yes.
Good
Yeah,
evening,
thanks.
commissioners, staff, and members of the community. My name is Claire Hahn, and I am the Director of Development for Madison Park. Since our second hearing, we've made many changes to incorporate all the comments received, and I know Commissioner Collins will make sure I stay on time, so I will jump right in and get through all of our changes. First, in response to the comments received from the Contra Costa County Fire Protection District, we've made a number of changes to the project, and I'll highlight some of those. First was we are widening the existing Golden Gateway by about 2 feet. The existing conditions of Golden Gateway currently does not meet the requirement for a apparatus access, which requires 26 feet of unobstructed road width. And given the 2 sides of parallel parking, it's about 2 feet shy of that. And in order to retain the street parking, we have elected to reduce the planting strip between the street and the sidewalk, but we'll still keep the street trees, but incorporate them with tree grades instead. One of the major comments we received from the fire department was regarding putting in a vehicle access road all along the southern perimeter of the site. And we have submitted a alternative means and methods request to the fire district, proposing to provide wet standpipes in lieu of the access road, and I'm happy to report that they've actually accepted that AMMR. We've also increased the setback on the southwest and southeast corner of the site in order to provide more level surface for fire and emergency rescue teams access via foot. As Sarah mentioned, one of the major comments we received was in regards to the parking and the lack of guest parking spaces. Our previous proposal entailed total of 93 spaces, 36 of which were tandem. So we've made a couple of changes to the parking plan. First, we reduced the underground parking garage floor plate by about 1,700 square feet. This was a result of comments received from the Contra Costa Flood Control District, asking us to try and mitigate the amount of potential structural impact that we would have to the concrete culvert. So we've pulled the footprint back further up north. Also, in order to provide more level walking surfaces for fire and emergency rescue along the back, pulling the footprint back allows us to have at grade planters along the back portion of the site. Secondly, we have incorporated City Lift's 2-level tandem puzzle lift system into the parking garage. 4 bays total provide 40 spaces. Due to the larger dimensional requirements of the mechanical system, the number of parking spaces have decreased slightly to 86. However, the number of independent parking spaces have been increased by 17, and the number of tandem spaces have been significantly reduced from 36 to 6, which still provides over a 1-to-1 ratio of independent parking spaces to the total number of units. Additionally, 6 independent spaces for guest parking have been created. 6 tandem spaces, which could be utilized as guest parking now, also could allow up to 12 guest parking spaces in the garage. Per comments received from the Flood Control District, DRC, as well as the Creeks Committee, several changes have been made to the creek side of the project. We have removed all project-related improvements, including the privacy fencing that had been previously located within that easement area, completely out of that easement. We will also be incorporating only native grasses and wildflowers as the new proposed planting within the easement area. We have also identified additional improvements to be made, like the educational component with the signage that you see on the bottom right. And also we had a follow-up meeting with the Lafayette Creeks Committee, and they provided us with the creek icon that's being used elsewhere in the city that we are going to be also incorporating into our site as the viewing area. And then the top right you see is the proposed fencing, which is going to be the replacement for the existing cyclone fencing on the culvert. So to clarify the questions regarding the easement and the width, so the Flood Control District for the most part, has it's on average about 14 feet of width in the easement area. But as you can see on the southeast corner, there is a pinch point where the easement narrows down to about 7 foot 4 inches at its narrowest. And then that red triangle you see there is portion of the flood control district easement that we do not own, that belongs to the property owner on the other side of the creek. And the 14 foot that you saw in the note from the FCD was regarding the shoulder that they're requesting. So in total, it would be about 14 feet, but our agreement with the Lafayette Creeks Committee, as well as given the how shallow the portion of the site is on the southeast corner, we could on average provide that width of 14 feet, but it would have to narrow down a bit at that pinch point in the corner. There were also concerns from our last meeting regarding how the massing would be perceived from the home to Moraga and whether there was a grade change between our site down to Moraga. And we were able to verify that essentially Moraga Boulevard and our site is coplanar. And so given the amount of distance, which ranges from 130 to 190 feet from the single family homes to our building, we believe that the massing is further mitigated. And there were also questions during our last ERC about the trees and whether they would be able to provide the screening and the density of screening from the homes. And of the 19 trees located along the southern portion of the site, only 3 of those will be removed and the rest of them will remain. So as you can see in these photos, that they do provide a great amount of screening from the homes on Moraga Boulevard. A couple other comments that we are following up on. One was, as Sarah mentioned, regarding the overall building height. So that has been reduced by 2.5 feet. The southern elevation also has been revised to change the open gable roof to a hip roof. And the increased setbacks, as I mentioned earlier, along the southern portion of the site create additional indents and further reduce its scale and massing. There was a couple comments regarding the northeastern elevation surrounding the garage entry as well as the tower element. The previous tower element included a termination that kicked out, but now we have reduced the scale of the termination by reducing its height and flattening the roof pitch, allowing it to end and drift without an exclamation point. We've also added horizontal projections to the 2nd and 3rd floor decks to break up the tall elevation. And that solid rail that's projected out helps to provide horizontality and break up that 4-story. This is a rendered view of what the northeast facing side of the building will look like onto Golden Gateway. And hopefully the parking garage doesn't look like a gaping hole in the ground anymore. And the projections that have been added to the 2nd and 3rd story, you can also see there. This is another view down Golden Gateway. You can see that that tower element has been flattened and does not kick out like it did previously. Commissioner Sim had requested during our last hearing to understand better how the internal portion of the courtyard will look, and that it was important to consider making it transparent, but also have it feel private because it is the residential entry. And so this is a rendered view based on our proposal that we had previously, where there is a gate feature at the entry. We also looked at an alternative of removing the gate and to provide more openness and transparency into the entry area. And I would love to get the DRC's thoughts on the alternatives. And there are also comments regarding the shipping container and getting more details regarding what the future design will look like. And we are going to be working with a shipping container cafe retail manufacturer that has done many of these across the Bay Area as well as other parts of the US. And we are envisioning that in terms of its aesthetics, it would mirror similar to sort of the details that we have in the project using wood siding as well as dark metal details. And lastly, in response to Commissioner Sims' comments regarding the lighting proposed for the site, we've created a site lighting plan where you can see much of the site will be lit by either sconces or the bollards at the garage entry. Also, we have proposed string lights that will be held up across the main entry area and to provide illumination, but not impose on the residents next door. And I think that was 10 minutes. If you have questions, I am happy to answer them.
All right. I don't have any questions. So Eugene, do you have any questions? I'm going to take that as a no. How about Glenn?
Fire department path that's there, is that going to coincide with where the future creek access would be, or the creek access would be closer to the fence?
The creek walkway would be separate from our paved
you
path
might
that you
actually
see
get
there.
2 walkways in that area then.
Sorry?
Okay.
Can you repeat the question, Glenn?
Well, I assume then that means that you would have 2 walkways in that area.
Yes.
Okay, and the other question is on the fencing along the creek. Have you met with flood control? Were they acceptable to that fencing? Because the creek committee is asking to coordinate, but I don't know if they've met with flood control or, so have you gotten word on that fence?
We've been in touch with the flood control district, and they told us that so long as, we'll have to submit the final design once we go to permit drawings after entitlement. But as long as the proposed fencing provides transparency and does not impose more structural load than what is currently there. And so we'll be reutilizing the existing steel posts, metal posts, and putting wood caps over them, and then stretching the wire mesh over it, so to minimize the impact to the culvert as much as possible.
Okay. And what about, I was unsure at the viewpoint of the creek on First Street. Is that fence coming up and wrapping around the corner there? That wire fence or what?
No, so that wire fence, because a significant portion of it, or a significant distance has to be set, that's just for the perimeter of the creek side, but at the actual viewing area, if you will, we'll put a decorative panel on that gate.
Okay. That's all my questions.
All right, great. Thanks. John, any questions for the applicant?
I do just have one quick one. With the design changes that you've made since our last meeting, has there been a reduction in the square footage, and is it a significant one?
There's been a reduction in the floor plate of the garage by about 1,700 square feet, but the residential component has been reduced slightly given the setbacks, but it remains largely the same.
Okay. Thank you. That's my question.
All right.
Patrick.
Yes, Eugene, go ahead.
I was kind of muted and I was trying to get on, but then it got cut. So I really appreciate that opportunity to, sorry, out of order here. Just have one comment for Ms. Hahn. Ms. Hahn, on the private courtyard that you depicted that potentially could be, you could be open-minded about the gate location that could potentially either disappear or place further back into the recess of that, what you call that courtyard look. I would like to just ask you if that certainly is a confirmation that you could accommodate. I would appreciate that look. Just from my perspective, this is such a long building, a long Golden Gate, that any opportunity to perpendicularly penetrate the linear facade look, because as much as your architect and yourself have worked so hard to break down the massing, and there's a long linear facade feel that you would have as you walk as a pedestrian, that I would like to take any opportunity you can convey in your scheme to allow the building to be very deeply penetrated or, you know, cut through, like this one courtyard presents itself. So I think I want to just ask you, confirming that you would be open to that, having the gate location be either disappeared or further recessed in to give us that very inviting, or what I would say is breaking the massing deeply into your heart of the building. You know, your building is like a finger system with a massing at the center of it. And if we could kind of do that, that would be great. So I just want to ask you that, further confirming.
Yes, so based on your suggestion, we took a look at removing the fence, and we actually like this look much better than the gate. And so I'm glad to hear that you are pleased with this alternative, and we'll move forward with this option.
Okay, and then on that one, and that's it, Chair, Mizan, on the side elevation, so every facade that has a perpendicular relationship to the long linear, you know, street frontage that you have, these fingers have like a U-shaped facading going on into the deep recess of these courtyards. There's about 5 rhythmic courtyard penetrations that you have here, this being the deepest, and then the parking garage, and then there's 2 more. I want to make sure that you return the corner into that facade so that as you walk or drive along, that the building doesn't look like sort of like a bare wall or a sidewall feel, when in fact the public experience of that street would still be 3-dimensional in that corner look of the street facade. Of course, you've done a good job there, just to make sure you've articulated with the architect this, the perpendicular areas, you know what I'm talking about, the facade that is perpendicular to those areas. Great. And I think you've addressed some of it. Just want to make sure you've articulated to bring as much value to your project where public is able to see into the building that you've presented to us. Okay. Thank you, Ms. On.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
Patrick, this is Glenn. Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I want to just clarify on the color. Most of the current renderings are showing sort of an olive and a blue tone to it, but you have some of the details on A 3.2 have a mustard color facade. Is that mustard color facade actually appear anywhere, or is that an old scheme?
Yeah, so this is actually still that mustard color. I think also depending on the type of computer screen you're looking at, it probably changes a bit, but this is the same color. It's that, it's the mustard, of sort of a muted mustard Dijon color.
Okay. And then the second question I have is that when I'm looking at detail 3A 3.2, and I look at landscape drawing L1, the public courtyard area, it doesn't give me the same appearance. I mean, it seems like on the one, there's very few trees and very open, almost exposed courtyard. Is it my imagination, or which one actually applies, the landscape one or?
Sorry, and which landscape sheet were you referring to?
L1.
And in the courtyard.
The public plaza. The
public plaza. Yes, it's the same. It's intended to depict the same, but of course, because it's a rendering and this is in plan view, but it's the same planting material that's been called out in the landscape that's just shown in 3D.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
All righty. So thank you for that Wonderful presentation. We are now going to open it up for public comment and turn it over to Sarah to let us know who wants to talk.
Like we have Andy Brown, so she'll be joining the meeting in just a minute. So if you do want to do a public comment, please raise your hand using the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen. If you're calling in, use *9. Andy, are you in?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, great. I just wanted to say thank you to Claire for listening to some of the neighborhood concerns about the massing and the parking. It's really, we really appreciate it. I did still have some questions. There were some slides that were moved through pretty quickly that I that I hadn't seen before. I didn't see in any of the attachments that showed pictures of, I couldn't quite tell what I was looking at, if it was elevation pictures looking towards the single level neighborhood, if they were from a certain vantage point, was that the roof line? Those were really interesting to me because that's my house. And so I'd love to get a little bit more information, since this is the first time I'm seeing that, because I still do really want to make sure that the interplay between the southern elevation and the single level homes is, really paid attention to, especially as it relates with mature trees and screening, and any sort of extra care that could be placed there just for neighborhood consideration.
Was that the extent of your comments?
Yes, but I'd love, if I don't know if it's, I don't know if we're allowed to.
Yeah, so they're going to have an opportunity to respond to all of the questions that are raised by the public.
Okay.
At the end of this, so it's not a debate or open forum. It's, you have your comments and then they'll address them hopefully adequately and in their opportunity.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that's my question is if she could help explain those pictures, what we're looking at in the vantage points and elevation points, but of the neighborhood on one or two of the slides, that would be great. And that's I'm done. Sign off.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Andy, I'll place you back as an attendee. If I can remember how to do it. And then I'll bring in the next public commenter, which is Jeff Gilman. Jeff, are you in?
I'm in, yeah.
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Even starting my video, but that's less important. So good evening, Sarah and Claire and commissioners. David Clark and I, on behalf of the Creeks Committee, submitted some comments for tonight's meeting, and I understand everyone, including the applicant, received those comments. So what I heard tonight, it didn't really address our comment about that we would like to coordinate the design of the fencing along the creek with the applicant, because we have a project just across the street from that. We call it our rain garden project, and we had proposed for that one to replace the fence as well, to go along with the Downtown Creeks plan. And, to me, it makes sense. It really would be a goal to come up with a uniform design for how that fence is going to be replaced along that reach of the creek. So I just wanted to make sure everyone understood the reason for our comment to coordinate with flood control. Then as far as the 10-foot wide creek easement condition at the east side of the property, we're concerned that if that permeable pavement walkway in the southeast corner that wraps around is built, and the retaining wall for that, it may actually encumber the future construction of a creekside trail, because that's where it gets narrow. And what's left over in the flood control district's easement at that point is just like 7.5 feet. So ideally, it would be that we marry those two things together at the time of construction so that we don't preclude or encumber or preclude the future condition of a creekside or future construction of a creekside trail. And then lastly, I understand there was some, Sarah, you said there was some question about the language of the condition. And I'm happy to try to clarify that if I knew what the confusion was. Our intent was not to have an easement for a creek trail that's beyond the current flood control district easement, but to accommodate the creekside trail within the flood control district easement. So that's all I have. Thank you again for allowing us to comment.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Jeff, have you met with flood control on a proposed fence design yet?
My understanding is that Danielle Sanchez, who was an associate engineer for the city, had met or at least conversed with the flood control district last fall. But then she no longer works for the city, and we're not exactly sure how far she got in the discussions or what was actually decided.
Okay, and do you have any comments in particular about the wire fence that is the majority of the fence at this time, appearance-wise?
You know, I don't really want to make design comments. I think that's more your bailiwick. I do agree it meets the transparency requirement that was stated in the flood control districts. I believe that was in their comment letter. And the thing we have to make sure, and I don't want to speak for flood control either, but I also, you know, my job for 12 years was building water infrastructure projects where security was a concern. And I think the flood control district would want to make sure that the fence would keep people out. Well, you can't keep people out if they really want to get into the flood control channel, but at least it would be a deterrent to having someone climb over and get into the flood control channel, where when it's really flowing is a dangerous situation.
Is that good, Glenn?
Yes, thank you.
All right, Sarah, next.
I don't see any other public comments. So again, raise your hand or *9 if you'd like to make a public comment. There are no other public comments.
All right, so I will close the public comment period and return it to the applicant to hopefully address those comments.
Okay, you have 5 minutes.
And I will work backwards from the questions or comments received. So starting with Jeff's comments, we'd be happy to meet with the Creeks Committee to coordinate a design for the cyclone fencing replacement. We just now have the parameters in which we can design the fencing around. And so after the meeting, Jeff, Dave, and anyone else in the Lafayette Creeks Committee, we can meet and coordinate that design together. And as far as the walkway, especially in the southeastern corner of the project is concerned, and really everywhere else, we would want the walkway that we have shown here to be separate from a public future creek walkway, precisely for the same reasons that, you know, we have been exploring setting the building back further, reducing the massing and the elevation for the to reduce the privacy impacts or the imposing on the privacy of the single family homeowners. I think that the future residents would also want to be afforded the same level of privacy in their own homes. And so to have a walkway that's really intended as just an emergency access and egress from the building out to the street, marry with what's going to be a public walkway, I think would be counterproductive to that goal. And so we would want to keep our walkway for egress and emergency access separate from a public path. And then going to Andy's question. So this view is taken from just right above the home on 3494 Moraga Boulevard, looking up north. And this is really showing the amount of screening that you're getting from the trees. And it's not just the trees that are on our side, but also in the yards of the single family homeowners across the creek from us. And as I mentioned earlier, we're only removing 3 of the 19 trees along this area. And as you can see or not see in this photo is the Lafayette Library, which is actually at a higher elevation and a taller building than what we are proposing. So based on the fact that you are barely able to see the library building, our building, which is at a lower elevation and lower in height, and the amount of trees that are going to be retained on site, we think that this does a good job of showing what the view from Moraga Boulevard will look like. And then these photos are also taken along Moraga. So I added the address numbers up top here so you can see where we are looking at. And with the exception of there's a cluster of trees at this corner where I'm pointing to sort of by 3474 and 3472. So if you can see my mouse cursor here up top, there's a cluster of trees in this corner, that corner that will be removed as part of the development. But the homeowners here have set their own fencing and also screening of trees right at the edge. And so when you're standing on this side, you can't really see into each other's property. And then all along here, with the exception of those 3 pine trees I mentioned earlier, we're all going to be keeping. And so this is pretty much in line with the view that will be maintained after the development. And I believe those are all the questions, unless I missed something, Sarah.
I believe that's correct. So does anyone from the commission have questions on the rebuttal or further clarifications before we begin our comments? Glenn?
For me, none.
Nothing, none. Eugene?
Hello?
Yeah. Nothing from you?
None?
Okay, great. And John?
No questions.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation and the clarifications. Glenn, why don't you start? You seem like you got some stuff to talk about.
Really not that much to talk about. I like the design. I mean, I do think it's still sort of massive, okay? Because the core of it is this big, long linear. And even though we have significant articulation along the north facade, it still is a big, long linear building. But taking into consideration, accessibility within the building, quarters, so on and so forth, breaking up the building to two buildings, to offset that linear doesn't seem to be feasible to me, because all you're going to do is have a dark canyon between the buildings. So I think the articulation is good. I'm sort of disappointed that the color is the mustard rather than the olive that I'm seeing on my screen. Because to be honest with you, I think the mustard makes the building look even bigger, whereas the olive makes the building look smaller. And I sort of like the olive in the blue scheme rather than the mustard in the blue scheme. Now, we might be splitting hairs about what your Dijon mustard looks like versus what mine is, but the drawing that, the ones that come out yellow, they're not French's mustard, but they're awfully yellow. Okay. In regards to the landscaping, I see that Penn, and for obvious reasons, Penn wants to have the trees that are along Golden Gate match the trees along the library. I don't agree with that in the case of where the public plaza is, okay? The trees that are at the library are tall and linear, and they don't have much breadth to them. And I see that plaza at the library is basically unusable, because you basically, unless you're going there for a tanning salon, it's not shaded, it's not inviting. And I would like to see the selection of trees along the public plaza area be more inviting. I think the sycamore gives a wider breadth to it. Since we already have sycamores along First Street, it sort of wraps around. I'm not calling for sycamores all the way down the street, but I think up into the entry, I think that it is in need of more shade. That's my comment. Regarding the creek stuff, it's sort of unfortunate that we're going to end up with two paths, but I understand why we have two paths, and for the privacy of the actual occupants of the apartments. So, I can live with that. Regarding the selection of the materials for the fence, I'm sorry that the Creeks Committee has been left in the cold because of staff's change. However, I really think that when you look at the conditions that were called out by the flood control about weight and so on and so forth, that the Madison's consideration of using the existing poles and stringing the wire across that and augmenting the wood is probably a good solution. I think that I would concentrate more on the observation area, what those two observation areas are. And I think, I guess at this point in time, I would say that it's sort of up to Madison, but I don't think it's a very fast item per se. So there may be some flexibility on, waiting on a final design, but I don't think that it's feasible for them to go a year and city staff not having resolved something. So I think something has to be like I almost look at their design as a default, except for the observation area. And if they can get a revised design that meets both parties' needs in a fast, expeditious manner, and they're willing to change, then that's fine. Otherwise, the west side of the creek needs to follow the same fencing. But I do see the observation area as being something that really needs to be coordinated on what those look like. And let's see, what else did I have? I understand Eugene's point on the opening without the fence or out without the gate at the courtyard entry. I actually sort of like the gate, but I understand architecturally how he's trying to change that pattern of that long linear line. And so I'm open to it being the option 2 that's being shown right now. And that's pretty much my comments.
Great, thanks, Glenn. Eugene?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Chair. Before I do a couple bullet items, and my comments would be short here because we've looked at it for a long time, and I want to say that the consultants and the project sponsor, Ms. Hahn, have worked hard, I think, to address many of our concerns. I also want to piggyback on Glenn's comment about the corner with more inviting and little more landscaping to create little more eye catch or more articulation, let's put it that way, from a sort of the plaza feel where the parklet might be proposed in the future or in the current. I would agree with the Glenn sentiment of having more inviting landscaping to be in that area. And so that could become a little bit more of a eye catch and something to be more worthy about as a corner feature to address the parklet, the retail venue that is being proposed. So my comments are about further articulation. I would want to make sure, as part of the findings of our own recommendation for approval to the Planning Commission, I want to make sure the roof vents, vent flues, flue vents, any sort of elements that jut out of the roof penetration or on the walls that allude to any utilitarian look on the, especially the front facade and the roof features along Golden Gate, as well as the other street around the corner. Make sure any flue vents, vent flues, they're all on the back side or they're stealthily dealt with. Of course, sometimes you might have a practical consideration that they may have to be someplace, but make sure they don't catch our eyes as we look at this long linear facade with a finger effect going on here. The lighting feature that we looked at, and I want to thank the applicant for showing us and demonstrating in a planned format the ideas, the overall underpinning idea behind lighting qualities here. I do appreciate the layers of lighting going on. I could see that on the sidewalk, low level illuminate light to sort of highlight softly the path, and then some landscape micro-scaled, smaller scale elements along that spine. And then you have some light on the building itself. Hopefully those have some kind of rhythmic pattern to further break up the massing, because we know all of us agree that it's a very long facade. And I know you're being very innovative to provide a sort of finger approach to mass this facility, but still very, very long. So any way you could do that with lighting as well at night, that would be really helpful. On the rear side, I do appreciate the walkway, that the easement that has been discussed for future consideration. And obviously, I cannot control the developer here, but I share with Glenn's sentiment. It's just an encouragement, of course. But if you could work with the Creek committee to come with a sort of an integrated feel of that area, that would be really appreciated. So last comment, the finger effect on the backside, same point of consideration and sensibility that we talked about on the street front. There is the one deep penetration on the backside. Just make sure, that area also from a privacy in this case, because of the rear yard, I really appreciate any other additional sensibility to any private sidelines and any what do you call lighting, pollution lights or anything like that that would disseminate from there to the other neighbor. Your cross section, the developer's cross section was very, very helpful from understanding the distance and the particular location of the residential property and also the vertical datum points relative to our building. So in general, really appreciate the additional feedback and progress being made to address our concerns. Of course, it's a still big building, and I know you're doing everything you can. So that's it. Thank you very much, Chair.
All righty, John.
Thank you. First, I want to say that I appreciate the applicant and the design team's responsiveness to our input. We do see very directly in the design and in the way the design is presented the response to earlier comments. So thank you for that. I feel that the changes are successful in responding to our concerns to the extent, I mean, given basically the size and bulk of the project, that is something that is not up for general discussion. The one comment piggybacking on something that Glenn said, not really being able to trust our computer screens for accurate representation of building colors. And personally, I'm not in favor of a very yellow color tone on that mustard. I'd like to ask that the final color selection be made with a submission of real building material samples. But in general, I think the design does what we're working for. So I have no further comments.
John, the open courtyard, your opinion on that?
The entry court?
Yes,
With
the open option 1 versus 2.
I could sort of see the arguments either way. I believe that given that what looks like sliding glass doors there on the left side of that walkway, to me, it's not a storefront, it's private residence. And I think that having a visually transparent gate there clarifies that is private space. I don't want to compromise the sense of depth, of visual depth there. But I would say a relatively transparent demarcation between public and private space, to me, is a logical move right there. So I would say, and I'm leaning toward option 1, but I wouldn't say I could accept either.
All righty. All right, so I'm just gonna say a couple of things. I very much appreciate all the addressing of comments for everything we talked about. And I really feel that this has moved significantly through this process, and I'm happy with where it is. I still feel that and agree with all the other commissioners that this is a very big building, but you've done a lot to address the bulk and mass, and just you addressed my concerns about parking. The hip roof in the rear addressed quite a bit for me, the scale from that direction. Absolutely like what you did with the parking entrance, and yes, it would assume it's going to look, or I believe it'll look a lot less than a gaping hole. The building at the east end seems the flat roof seems a little out of character with the rest, but I understand what you're doing, and I do prefer that it doesn't jut up. So it's an improvement. I agree with the open courtyard option 2, but I think you need to come up with something as John was saying, to let people know that it's not a public space. So, how you do that without making it a very robust barrier, kind of look to you guys to come up with something with that. But I understand the pathway, and I think it's important to have the private access. It would be nice if you could give up another foot, but you have planners there, and I think you've done a good job with that portion of the building. So I don't really feel there's something we really need to do there. I would recommend that we, and I think it's already been said repeatedly, I think we need to see the colors. I'd like to see a mock-up as a condition when this goes to construction, because I agree with everyone else. I don't think it should be blue and yellow. That's just not, that's not what we're looking for. But mostly, I really feel like you've addressed all our comments. You certainly addressed all my comments. And other than it being bigger than I'd like to see there, which again is more of the next commission's issue, I think you've done a great job. So that's all I have. There is the one condition, Sarah, that I'm hoping you'll be able to work out the wording specifically and get it correct, and with the letter from Jeff.
Right. I think if the commission is on board with the intent, we can work out the specific language.
It sounded like we all were. I would like to add the colors as a condition. I want to see that back.
Sure. Can I just maybe go over what I think I heard?
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay. So a color revision showing the mock-up at construction. The final color should have real samples and be less bright yellow. I guess my question for that is, do we want this to come back to the full commission, a subcommittee, one commissioner?
I would prefer it was just one or two or something like that. I don't think it needs to come back to the commission. It's more of a, somebody go out, look at with the planner, you or one of the other planners, and I mean, unless one of you guys has an issue with that, I think we're all saying we don't want to see French's yellow mustard with blue. So
I heard more inviting landscape at the plaza, including shade. I heard to coordinate the observation areas at the creek. And I heard roof penetrations to minimize them or make them stealth. And then also to remove the courtyard gate, but to delineate it as a private space.
I think that covers everything I said. Does it, Glenn, does that cover you?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
And Eugene?
Yes, everything's covered.
And John?
Yes.
All right, then I'll make a motion that's our motion. Can I have a second?
I have a second.
Second.
Okay, we got a couple seconds. So all those in favor, I'm going to say aye. Glenn?
Aye.
Eugene?
Aye.
And John?
Aye.
All right, there we go. So
Great.
it is unanimous. Thank you
Thank
for
you
coming
so
in.
much.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all the work that you put in, and good luck with the next 2 meetings.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All righty. Going back to the agenda. We have nothing else. So we have no new public hearings, other business, ARC volunteer for July 31st.
I can handle it.
All right. And then commissioners report. Does anyone have anything to report? I'm going to say that's a no. Hopefully everyone is doing well. Sarah, do you have anything for us? We don't have a director's report on here any longer, but is there anything that you want to add?
Nothing that I can think of other than there was a scheduling consideration. And so the next meeting will be on the 13th of August.
That's Thursday.
That is a Thursday rather than a Wednesday.
Okay. And do we know what's coming up on that?
I believe there are 2 items. I can just take a peek if let me just grab it quick here. We're all digital now, so I can just easily DRC on the it looks like a change of conditions. I think there are actually 2 items, but I don't have the full description here, so I don't know exactly what they are.
Good enough. Well, unless anyone else has anything else, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Likewise, everyone. Stay
All right,
safe,
thanks.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, bye.